The soft hum of the radiator filled the room, steady like a distant lullaby. Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair by the window, a pale green shawl wrapped loosely over her shoulders, and her hands gently resting on the worn fabric of her lap. The sun hadn't yet risen. The sky was smeared with early indigo, and the glass pane reflected the faint lines etched across her cheeks like quiet topography, a map of places no longer traveled. She was 71, alone, and mostly fine with that. She hadn't always been alone. There had been Michael. His shoes still sat by the door, not because she refused to move them but because she simply never remembered to. Or perhaps, deep down, she wanted them there, exactly where he used to kick them off each night, tired from long shifts at the hardware store. He had died nearly 9 years ago, and the ache had faded into something less sharp but still stubborn, like the dull stiffness in her knees before a storm. This morning, however, felt different. She had woken up with a strange tightness in her chest. Not fear, not pain, but anticipation, as though something had finally knocked on the door of her quiet life. She pulled herself out of bed, feet brushing the hardwood floors that always creaked like they too remembered the weight of him. A gust of wind rattled the window frame, and she instinctively hugged the shawl closer, though it did little to warm her bones. Downstairs, she poured her tea and stood in the kitchen staring out into the backyard where the birch tree leaned precariously toward the fence. Had been like that for years. Michael always said he'd take care of it. She smiled faintly at the thought. The tree was still standing. By her. After breakfast, Eleanor made her way to the attic. She hadn't climbed those steps in ages, but something pulled her upward. Each stair groaned in protest as though warning her away. When she reached the top, the dusty room greeted her like an old friend forgotten. Boxes, photo albums, a moth-eaten wedding dress folded into a faded garment bag. And then, the easel. It sat in the far corner, covered in a white sheet. Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat. She hadn't painted since Michael passed. She used to say colors were her voice. After him, she had nothing to say. But today, her fingers trembled with something close to need. She uncovered the easel slowly, reverently. The canvas was blank, but the brushes and paints, stored carefully in a wooden box nearby, were untouched by time. She took one into her hand. It still fit like it had been waiting. And just like that, Eleanor began to paint. The first stroke was shaky, the second unsure. But by the third, something loosened in her ribs. She painted without thinking, letting her hand remember what her heart had buried. Shades of twilight. A woman at a window. The outline of a memory. She painted until the afternoon light had shifted, until her back ached and her stomach reminded her of time. But she didn't stop until the canvas had a face. Her own, only younger. Not the face in the mirror now, but the one that had laughed under sunlight, kissed in the rain, and whispered secrets into a man's chest. Over the next days, she returned to the attic again and again. She painted her mother's garden, the lake house they once stayed at in '74, the cafe where she and Michael first met. Tiny details she thought she had forgotten came rushing back with every brushstroke. Each painting was a memory made whole again. Each color was a feeling. And then one morning she painted something new. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a place or person she had known. It was a woman sitting on a bench in a red coat, her hair wild in the wind, laughing at something unseen. There was joy in her eyes, but it was her own face again, this time as she was now. Eleanor stared at it for a long time. Was that what she looked like now? Could it be? That evening, she did something she hadn't done in years. She got dressed, really dressed. A soft silk blouse with a plunging neckline she hadn't worn since the '80s. A deep burgundy lipstick she found at the bottom of an old drawer. Her silver hair she pinned loosely to one side. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror and blinked. She didn't look younger, but she looked alive. Eleanor lit candles. Not for anyone else but for herself. She played an old jazz record on the turntable. She poured a glass of wine. And she danced. Slowly, quietly, but with all the rhythm she could remember. The living room transformed into something sacred. A chapel of rediscovery. Later, sitting by the window again, she opened her laptop. She made a post on a local art forum, sharing a blurry picture of one of her paintings. Within a week, she had 5 responses asking if she sold prints. 2 people wanted to commission her. One woman, a widow from New Hampshire, said Eleanor's painting reminded her of her sister who had passed last year. Eleanor cried reading it. It was the first time in a decade someone had connected with her soul, and it was through her art. The paintings kept coming. So did the messages. She even joined a small online art group, 5 women over 60, each rediscovering parts of themselves they thought had been put away forever. They called themselves the Silver Strokes. One Sunday afternoon, Eleanor stood in front of her open closet and picked out a bright turquoise dress. It had a V-neck that dipped a little too low by today's standards, but she smiled. "This is who I am," she whispered. And it was. That feeling in her chest, what had begun as tightness, had become warmth, a kind of quiet pride. Not for anything extraordinary, but for choosing to live. For choosing herself. Not every day was glowing. There were still moments she reached for the other side of the bed. Still hours where silence pressed too close. But she no longer feared them. She had her colors again. And in the middle of one quiet evening, as she stood watching the last of the sunlight soften the corners of her room, Eleanor whispered something to the empty space around her. "I never thought I'd feel this way again." But she did. And it was enough.